I never saw it coming. One morning, I was enjoying my 5-acre slice of Colorado heaven, and the next, I was watching bulldozers tear through my property line. That was the beginning of my 2-year nightmare with the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, a battle that would cost me nearly everything. My name is Frank Iverson, and until recently, I was living what most would consider the American dream. After 15 years of working in tech in Denver, I'd saved enough to buy a beautiful property in Pine Ridge, a peaceful mountain community about an hour outside the city. The property had belonged to my uncle, and when he passed away 5 years ago, he left it to me at a price I couldn't refuse. 5 acres of pristine mountain land with a cozy 3-bedroom cabin that I'd spent the last few years renovating with my own hands. The views were spectacular rolling mountains as far as the eye could see, and the privacy was exactly what I needed after years of apartment living in the city. I was still able to commute to Denver 3 days a week for my job, while working remotely the rest of the time. Pine Ridge had a homeowners association, but when I purchased the property, they seemed reasonable. The monthly fees were modest and the rules weren't too restrictive. I'd read horror stories about tyrannical HOAs, but I figured those were rare exceptions. Besides, my property was on the edge of the development, bordered by national forest on one side. What could possibly go wrong? I should have paid more attention to the warning signs. The first red flag appeared at the annual HOA meeting 3 years after I moved in. The president, a stern woman named Karen Whitfield, announced that the association was exploring new revenue streams to enhance community amenities. She was flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who talked about investment opportunities and community growth potential. I didn't think much of it at the time. I voted against the motion to increase our monthly dues by 30%, but I was outnumbered. The increase passed, and I grumbled but paid up. I should have realized then that Karen had bigger plans. The real trouble began on a Tuesday morning in April. I was working from home when I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was road work on the main community road, but the noise kept getting closer. When I stepped onto my back deck, I couldn't believe my eyes. 2 large bulldozers were clearing trees near my property line. I immediately grabbed my jacket and hiked over to where the workers were operating. A man in a hard hat was consulting blueprints spread across the hood of a pickup truck. "Excuse me," I called out. "What's going on here?" "This is private property." The man looked up, seemingly unsurprised by my presence. "We're breaking ground for the new Pine Ridge vacation rentals. Got all the permits right here." He tapped the blueprints. "Vacation rentals. This is my land. I didn't authorize this." He frowned and looked at the papers again. "This is HOA land according to these plans. Plot 22B through 22K. That's impossible. My property extends all the way to that ridge." I pointed to the tree line about 100 yards away. The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA." "We're just following the approved plans." I immediately called Karen Whitfield. Her assistant put me on hold for 15 minutes before Karen finally picked up. "Frank," she said, her voice dripping with forced pleasantry. "I was expecting your call." "Karen, there are bulldozers on my property. What the hell is going on?" "Oh, there must be some confusion. Those workers are on HOA common land. We're building our new vacation rental complex. Didn't you read the newsletter?" I had received the monthly newsletter, but I'd only skimmed it. There had been something about community enhancement projects, but nothing specific about building on what I knew was my land. "Karen, I have the deed to this property. 5 acres. The land they're clearing is within my property line." "Well, Frank, if you had attended the special meeting last month, you would know that we had a survey done. It turns out there was an error in some of the original property designations. The board voted to correct those errors." My blood pressure was rising. "You can't just redraw property lines and take my land." "No one is taking anything, Frank. We're simply correcting an administrative error. The proper paperwork has been filed with the county. Feel free to check if you don't believe me." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, Victor Sampson. He was semi-retired but had handled the purchase of my property and was familiar with the details. "They can't just do that, can they?" I asked after explaining the situation. Victor sighed. "They shouldn't be able to, no, but let me look into it. In the meantime, you should document everything. Take photos, record conversations if Colorado law allows it, and don't sign anything the HOA sends you." I followed his advice and spent the rest of the day taking pictures of the construction and my original property markers. I also dug out my deed and all the paperwork from when I'd purchased the place. That evening, I drove to the county records office just before they closed. What I found there sent a chill down my spine. A new survey had indeed been filed, showing nearly 2 acres of my property as common area belonging to the Pine Ridge HOA. The document had been filed 3 months earlier and included a signature that looked vaguely like mine, but I had definitely never signed it. When I protested to the clerk, she looked sympathetic but shrugged. "If you believe there's been fraud, you'll need to file a formal dispute and probably get a lawyer involved." By the time I got home, the workers had left for the day, but they had already cleared about half an acre of trees. I took more photos and sent everything to Victor. Over the next few days, construction continued despite my protests. I filed a formal complaint with the county and got a temporary restraining order to halt construction. But someone must have pulled strings, because 3 days later the order was lifted and the bulldozers returned. I confronted Karen again, this time at her office in the Pine Ridge Community Center. Her assistant tried to tell me she was in a meeting, but I refused to leave. "This is fraud, Karen," I said when she finally agreed to see me. "I never signed any document transferring my land to the HOA." Karen sat behind her desk, perfectly coiffed in a blue blazer, her blonde bob not moving an inch as she shook her head. "Frank, I understand you're upset, but the board has all the necessary documentation. This project will benefit everyone in Pine Ridge. Property values will increase and we'll all share in the rental income." "I don't want rental income. I want my property as it was." Karen's smile tightened. "The decision has been made, Frank. The vote was unanimous." "I never voted on this. As I mentioned, you missed the special meeting." "We had a quorum without you." I slammed my hand on her desk. "This is theft, Karen. I'm going to fight this." Her smile disappeared completely. "I wouldn't recommend that, Frank. Fighting the HOA will only cost you money and cause you stress. We have excellent attorneys on retainer." I left her office feeling defeated but determined. Victor advised me to file a lawsuit, but warned me it could take months or even years to resolve, and in the meantime, construction would likely continue. He was right. Despite my legal challenge, within 2 months, the foundation for 10 small cabins had been laid on what used to be my land. Each cabin was about 800 square feet, designed in a rustic mountain style that actually would have been attractive if they weren't built on stolen property. My lawsuit was moving at a glacial pace. The HOA's lawyers filed motion after motion for delays and dismissals. Each time, Victor would counter, but the process was draining both my bank account and my spirit. What made it worse was that I had to watch the entire construction process from my home. The noise began at 7 a.m. sharp each day, just late enough to comply with noise ordinances, and continued until sunset. My peaceful mountain retreat had become a construction zone. By fall, the cabins were completed, and to my horror, they started appearing on vacation rental websites. "Experience the beauty of Colorado at Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats," the listings proclaimed. The rates were steep $300 to $450 per night, depending on the season. My lawsuit was still crawling through the court system, but I had a small victory when the judge ordered that all rental income be placed in an escrow account, until the ownership dispute was resolved. Karen seemed unfazed. At the next regular HOA meeting, she announced that the vacation rental project was a tremendous success, and that they were already booking reservations for the ski season. I stood up during the queue and a portion. How can you call it a success when the ownership of that land is still in dispute? You're renting out property that was stolen from me. Karen's expression hardened. Frank, we've been over this. The board has documentation showing that land belongs to the HOA. Your continued disruptions at these meetings are not helpful. Several of my neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few nodded in agreement with me, but most avoided eye contact. I realized then how effectively Karen had isolated me. She'd been spreading her version of events for months, painting me as the unreasonable one. Despite my objections, the rentals opened for business in November, just in time for the ski season. Every weekend, I watched as subs with out-of-state plates drove past my cabin to the rentals beyond. The guests were generally respectful, but the constant flow of strangers so close to my home was unnerving. Victor called with more bad news in December. The judge is leaning toward the HOA's position, Frank. They've produced meeting minutes showing that the board voted on this project over a year ago with notices sent to all homeowners. That's impossible. I never received any notice about this. I believe you, but they have documentation that says otherwise. They even have a signed proxy form supposedly from you, giving your vote to the board president for that meeting. It's a forgery. I never signed anything like that. I know, and we can get a handwriting expert to testify to that, but it complicates things. They've created a paper trail that makes it look like everything was done by the book. As winter turned to spring, my case finally got a court date. But by then, the rentals had been operating for nearly 6 months. The escrow account held over $300,000 in rental income, according to the quarterly report the HOA was required to provide. The case was heard by Judge Melissa Thornton, a no-nonsense woman who had a reputation for fairness but little patience for delays. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days. On the first day, the HOA's lawyers presented their case. They showed the amended property survey, the meeting minutes, and the supposedly signed proxy form. They argued that the HOA had acted in good faith based on corrected information about the property boundaries. When it was Victor's turn, he methodically dismantled their case. He presented the original survey from when I purchased the property, photographs of the original property markers, and most damning of all, a report from a handwriting expert who testified that the signature on the proxy form was a forgery. Karen took the stand on the second day. She was composed and articulate, describing how the board had identified the need for additional revenue streams and had discovered the discrepancy in the property lines. We sent multiple notices to all homeowners, she testified. Mr. Iverson never responded, but we received his proxy form giving his vote to the board. When Victor cross-examined her, he focused on the timing. Miss Whitfield, when exactly did you send these notices to Mr. Iverson? Karen consulted some papers. The first notice went out in January of last year, with follow-up notices in February and March. Victor handed her a stack of documents. These are Mr. Iverson's mail records, showing every piece of mail he received during those months. There's nothing from the Pine Ridge HOA except the regular monthly newsletter, which made no mention of this project or any vote. Karen's confidence wavered slightly. Perhaps they were lost in the mail. We can't control the postal service. All 3 notices were lost. That seems unlikely. And what about email? Did you email these notices as well? We may have. I'd have to check our records. I've already checked. Mr. Iverson has provided access to his email accounts. There are no emails from the HOA regarding this project or vote. Karen's composure began to crack. The board followed all proper procedures. If Mr. Iverson didn't receive the notices, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't invalidate our actions. Victor then presented the testimony of Linda Morgan, the former HOA secretary who had resigned shortly after the project began. Linda testified that Karen had instructed her to backdate meeting minutes and had handled the proxy forms herself. She told me it was just a formality, Linda testified. That everyone would benefit from the project in the end, so it didn't matter if we took some shortcuts with the paperwork. By the end of the second day, I was feeling cautiously optimistic. The evidence was clearly in my favor, and even Judge Thornton was looking skeptically at Karen and the HOA's lawyers. On the morning of the third day, I arrived at court to find Karen in intense discussion with her lawyers. They looked grim. When the session began, their lead attorney requested a brief recess to confer with his client. Judge Thornton granted 30 minutes. When court resumed, the HOA's lawyer announced that they wanted to propose a settlement. They would acknowledge that the proper procedures hadn't been followed and would restore my property rights. In exchange, they would keep the cabins and negotiate a fair lease for the land they occupied. Victor and I stepped out to discuss the offer. "It's not a bad deal," he said. "You get your property back and you'll get ongoing income from the lease." But something didn't feel right. "Why the sudden change? They've been fighting tooth and nail for months." Victor nodded. "I think Linda's testimony hurt them badly. And I suspect they're worried about potential criminal charges for the forgery." We returned to the courtroom, and Victor announced that we would need time to consider the offer. Judge Thornton agreed and ordered a full day's recess. That evening, as I was pondering the settlement offer, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Michael Chen, one of my neighbors who served on the HOA board. Michael had always seemed like a decent guy, though we weren't close. "I can't stay long," he said nervously after I invited him in. "Karen doesn't know I'm here, but I thought you should see these before you agree to any settlement." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were copies of emails between Karen and someone named Vincent Harris at Pinnacle Development Group. The emails discussed the acquisition of my property for the vacation rental project, with Harris congratulating Karen on securing the necessary approvals and discussing how they would split the profits. Karen told the board this was all above board, Michael explained. That you had agreed to sell that portion of your property. By the time we realized what was really happening, construction had already begun. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. Michael looked ashamed. "Because what they did was wrong and I can't be part of it anymore. Karen has been pressuring the board to accept this settlement because she's afraid of what will happen if the judge rules against us and orders a full investigation." I thanked Michael for his courage, and after he left, I immediately called Victor. He was as stunned as I was by the emails. "This changes everything," he said. "This isn't just about improper procedures. This is conspiracy and fraud. We need to reject the settlement and present these to the judge tomorrow." The next morning, when court resumed, Victor announced that we were rejecting the settlement offer and had new evidence to present. The HOA's lawyers objected, but Judge Thornton allowed it. When the emails were entered into evidence, the courtroom erupted. Karen's face went pale, and her lawyers huddled around her in urgent conversation. Judge Thornton called for order and then announced a 1-hour recess. When we returned, the HOA's lead attorney announced that his client wished to withdraw their defense and would accept whatever judgment the court deemed appropriate. Judge Thornton was not satisfied. "Given the evidence of potential criminal activity, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation. In the meantime, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Iverson's property rights are to be fully restored, and all funds in the escrow account are to be transferred to him as compensation for the unauthorized use of his property." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. After nearly a year of fighting, I had won, but the saga wasn't over. 2 weeks later, Karen Whitfield and Vincent Harris were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Several other board members, including the treasurer who had helped conceal the financial transactions, were also charged as accomplices. The criminal case moved much faster than my civil suit had. Karen eventually pleaded guilty to reduce charges in exchange for testimony against Harris, who was apparently the mastermind behind similar schemes in other communities. As for the vacation rentals, they were now legally on my property. After much deliberation, I decided to keep them rather than tear them down. The HOA, under new leadership, agreed to a fair management arrangement. They would handle the bookings and maintenance, and we would split the profits equitably. It was strange at first, having these buildings that had caused me so much grief now generating income for me. But in a way, it felt like justice. The project that Karen had tried to steal from me was now benefiting me instead. The whole experience changed my view of Pine Ridge. Some neighbors had stood by me, like Michael Chen, who was elected as the new HOA president. Others had enabled Karen's corruption through their silence and inaction. The community slowly began to heal. The new board instituted transparency measures, including recorded meetings and detailed financial reports available to all homeowners. Monthly dues were reduced to their original levels, and a community vote was required for any major expenditures. As for me, I considered selling my property and moving somewhere without an HOA. But Pine Ridge was my home, and I wasn't going to let Karen Whitfield drive me away. Besides, I now had 10 beautiful vacation rentals that were generating enough income for me to cut back on my work hours and enjoy my mountain retreat more fully. 1 year after the court ruling, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue on my property, the full 5 acres that were rightfully mine. As I watched my neighbors enjoying themselves, with the vacation cabins visible in the background, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out if Michael Chen hadn't found the courage to come forward with those emails. Karen Whitfield was sentenced to 3 years in prison for her role in the scheme. Vincent Harris received a longer sentence, as investigators discovered he had defrauded homeowners in 3 other communities across Colorado and Utah. The criminal case brought unexpected closure. During her sentencing hearing, Karen finally admitted what I had suspected all along. The vacation rental project had been planned from the beginning as a way to generate income that would primarily benefit the board members, not the community. My property had been targeted because it was on the edge of the development and had the best views. We thought he would give up and sell, Karen testified, not looking at me as I sat in the courtroom. Most people don't have the resources or determination to fight an HOA for that long. She had underestimated me, and she had underestimated the power of truth and persistence. In the end, the Pine Ridge vacation rentals became a positive part of our community. The new board used their portion of the income to improve community amenities without raising dues. We installed a new playground, upgraded the community center, and established a scholarship fund for local students. I still worked my tech job in Denver, but with the rental income, I could afford to work just 3 days a week. The rest of my time was spent enjoying my property, hiking in the surrounding forests, and occasionally greeting the guests who stayed in my vacation rentals. Sometimes, when I saw families enjoying their mountain vacation in the cabins that had once been the source of so much stress, I felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for what Karen and her accomplices had done, of course, but for the unexpected way things had turned out. The ordeal had taught me valuable lessons about vigilance, community, and standing up for what's right, even when it seems like a losing battle. I learned that HOAs can be forces for good when run with transparency and genuine concern for the community, but can become tyrannical when led by those seeking personal gain. Most importantly, I learned that home isn't just about property rights and deeds, although those are certainly worth fighting for. It's about creating a place where you belong, surrounded by a community you can trust. 2 years after the court case, I was sitting on my deck, enjoying the sunset over the mountains, when I received an email from Victor. He had retired fully by then, but had kept in touch. "Thought you might find this interesting," the message read, with a news article attached. The article detailed how several states were passing new laws strengthening homeowner protections against HOA abuses, specifically citing the Pine Ridge case as a catalyst for reform. I smiled as I read it, feeling a sense of vindication. My fight hadn't just been for my property. It had helped spark changes that would protect others from experiencing what I had gone through. That evening, as I walked the full perimeter of my property, past the vacation cabins that were now full of summer guests enjoying their Colorado vacations, I felt at peace. The property markers that I had fought so hard to defend were still there, but they seemed less important now. What mattered was that this was my home, and after everything, I had managed to keep it. The Pine Ridge community had changed for the better. The transparency measures implemented after Karen's removal had revealed other financial irregularities, which were promptly corrected. The atmosphere at community meetings was now one of cooperation rather than confrontation. I even found myself volunteering for the landscaping committee, helping to plan and maintain the community's shared spaces. It was strange how things had come full circle from fighting the HOA to actively participating in it. Sometimes, new residents would move in and eventually hear the story of the great HOA battle from longer-term neighbors. Occasionally, they would seek me out, curious about the details. I always tried to be fair in my retelling, emphasizing that the problem had been with specific individuals abusing their power, not with the concept of an HOA itself. In a way, what happened with the vacation rentals had strengthened our community. We had faced a crisis together and had emerged with a clearer understanding of the importance of engagement and oversight in community governance. As for the rentals themselves, they became a point of pride for Pine Ridge. We maintained them to high standards, and they developed a reputation as some of the best vacation properties in the area. The income they generated allowed us to keep HOA dues reasonable while still providing excellent amenities. 3 years after the court case, I met Vanessa Harrison, a wildlife photographer who had booked one of the cabins for a month-long stay while she worked on a project documenting local elk populations. We struck up a friendship that gradually deepened into something more. When her project ended, she didn't leave. Instead, she moved into my cabin, bringing her cameras, her love of nature, and a fresh perspective on life at Pine Ridge. Together, we made improvements to the property, adding a greenhouse where we could grow vegetables year-round and building a studio where she could work on her photography. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. The vacation rentals operated seamlessly in the background of our lives, providing income without requiring much attention from me. The new management company handled the day-to-day operations efficiently, and guests rarely caused any problems. There were occasional reminders of the battle I'd fought. Sometimes, I would receive an email or letter from someone in another state who had read about my case and was facing their own HOA struggle. I always responded with encouragement and what advice I could offer. 5 years after the court ruling, Michael Chen stepped down as HOA president, and to my surprise, several neighbors suggested that I run for the position. At first, I laughed off the idea after everything that had happened. It seemed absurd that I would want to lead the very organization I had fought against. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Who better to ensure that the HOA remained fair and transparent than someone who had experienced firsthand what could happen when it wasn't? I agreed to run, and was elected with overwhelming support. My first official act was to propose a homeowners Bill of Rights that would be incorporated into the HOA bylaws, ensuring that all future boards would be bound by clear rules regarding transparency, communication, and respect for property rights. As I settled into my role as HOA president, I often reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. From fighting bulldozers on my property to leading the very organization that had once tried to take my land life had a way of coming full circle. The vacation rentals continued to operate successfully, now fully integrated into the community. We even established a program where Pine Ridge residents could use them at a discount for family gatherings that were too large for their own homes, making them truly a a community resource. Karen Whitfield was eventually released from prison after serving her sentence. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had moved to Arizona to live with her sister. Vincent Harris received a longer sentence due to his involvement in multiple fraudulent schemes and was still serving his time. The lesson of their downfall wasn't lost on anyone in our community. The new board operated with complete transparency, and major decisions were always put to a community vote. The atmosphere at our meetings was collaborative rather than combative. In the end, what had begun as a nightmare waking up to bulldozers on my property had transformed into something positive for everyone involved except, of course, for those who had broken the law. The vacation rentals that had been built through deception now provided income that benefited the entire community. And the governance reforms that resulted from the scandal had created a more democratic and responsive HOA. My 5 acres of Colorado mountain land remained intact, with the vacation rentals occupying just a small portion of it. The rest remained as I had always wanted it, a peaceful retreat where I could enjoy the natural beauty that had drawn me here in the first place. As I stood on my deck one evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, with Vanessa by my side and the soft lights of the occupied vacation cabins visible in the distance, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The fight had been worth it, not just for my property rights, but for the stronger community that had emerged from the conflict. The Pine Ridge HOA was now a model for others in the region, with other associations sending representatives to learn from our transparency practices and governance structure. The story of our transformation from a cautionary tale of HOA abuse to an example of community empowerment had spread beyond our small mountain community. And I, who had once considered moving away from Pine Ridge to escape the HOA, was now leading it with a commitment to the principles I had fought for: fairness, transparency, and respect for homeowners' rights. It wasn't the outcome I could have ever predicted when I first heard those bulldozers on my property, but it was one I had come to cherish. My home was secure, my community was thriving, and the vacation rentals that had once symbolized corruption and overreach now represented our community's resilience and ability to transform a negative into a positive. The deed to my property, which Karen Whitfield and her accomplices had tried to manipulate, now hung framed in my home office, a reminder of the importance of vigilance and persistence in protecting what matters most.